July 14th, 1918. A bunch of American soldiers were partying it up in Paris. It's Bastille Day, which is essentially like French Independence Day. So they were having a great time, just bar hopping around. I mean, yes, even though like World War I is happening, they still were partying, it's fine. Anyway, at this time, like Paris was being occupied by the Germans and the war had been going on for years. So at this point, Paris was looking a little rough. James Donovan, one of these American soldiers, was leaving a bar with his buddies. And while he's leaving, he accidentally kicks a bundle of rags with his boot. So he kicks it, and then this bundle of rags barks back at him. And he's like, what the fuck? Well, it turns out it wasn't just it wasn't a bunch of rags on the ground. It was actually a scruffy little stray dog. Yeah, a little stray dog that lived on the street. So James, I guess, was feeling a little chaotic. So he decided to bring the dog back with them to the military base. And to me, I was like, oh, they must have had a good time. Well, at least that's how you know they had a good time. You leave to have beer with some friends and then you come back with a stray French dog. I mean, come on, that's a story. So James Donovan names the dog Rags. I think it's obvious why. And the two of them become the very best friends. So I guess Rags was a little terrier mix. So he's a pretty small dog with wiry hair. And he was so small that wherever James went, that Rags would go too. And all the soldiers who lived with James in the 1st Infantry Division, they loved having Rags around. I mean, who wouldn't? So they would slip him scraps of their food just right off their plates. And they would bring him everywhere they went. Rags would also drink water out of James's helmet and chase rats out of the trenches where the men would sleep and fight. So it was they looked out for him and he looked out for them. Cute. So as time goes on, the division starts to notice that Rags has some, special abilities. Not only was he just a great dog for morale out in the trenches, but Rags, he had some special ears. His ears were so sensitive that they could hear the buzz of incoming missiles before the men could. So Rags would alert the men by flattening himself on the ground, which would give the men enough time to take cover. So if they saw Rags flatten on the ground, so did the soldiers, right? And Rags was never wrong. So it's paying attention to him could freaking save your life. James Donovan was what they called a signal man in the military. So he was the one who would put down the telephone wires that made it possible for the men at base to communicate with the soldiers back on the battlefield. Apparently, just working alongside him, Rags was able to help James identify places where the phone line had a broken wire. It was believed that Rags could do this because dogs in general have a really good sense of smell, and Rags could tell the difference between an open and a closed wire just with his nose. That's special. Hello. So Rags would point the spot out to Donovan, who would be able to then repair it. So it's teamwork. Incredible. I love it. I love the story. I want a dog named Rags. So basically, Rags is a precious angel and the rest of us are scum. That's what I'm getting from this story. Apparently, he even learned to salute Rags. I know, this part I was Pixar didn't happen, but I'll believe it just because it's a cute story, But I guess whenever a general would walk by, Rags would salute. I know, I need a visual. I really do. Because I don't think dogs' bones bend like that, right? I got questions, but pretty soon, Rags wasn't just some stray that James had found on the street. Nay. Nah, he was a respected member of the 1st Infantry Division. Go Rags! As if he wasn't doing enough already, James taught Rags to send messages on the battlefield. Now, this was a game changer, and it gave the American infantry a huge advantage. On top of that, for a dog, it can be a very difficult skill to teach them. And for some reason, Rags over here, just being the little angel that he is, it wasn't hard for him at all to catch on. He was just a special little baby genius. So James was able to teach Rags how to send messages, and James would tuck a message under his collar and then send him to whoever the message was meant for. And Rags would just no. I just love this story. So Rags would carry this little message, just willingly during the peak of battles, which is brave. right? Even for a dog who has like no idea what's going on, or like the fact that he's in the middle of a war. But I mean, there's like guns blasting, there's shrapnel exploding. War is loud. And Rags did not have earmuffs. Most of the time, Rags would have to like cross an open area and the enemy would like literally just be shooting at him. But nobody could take Rags down. This is so precious. Once it became known that Rags could send messages successfully, bitch, he was a game changer, and he was doing it all the time. The 1st Infantry came to rely on him to get urgent messages about enemy fire or their location back to the base. Now, if you're thinking, oh my God, animal abuse, listen, they did have like men doing this job, and they were called runners. They were the ones carrying messages back and forth, but it was like a really dangerous job. If you got that job, you didn't want it, okay? So it was nice that it was up to this dog. For those guys, right? They're like, fuck, okay. So one day Rags was on a mission to deliver a message, right? And he had come across like a dead runner out on the battlefield. And when Rags approaches him, he's like, oh my God. Well, he's a dog, so he doesn't say, oh my God, but in his mind, he's like, that's a US soldier. He must have recognized him. And then Rags takes the note that was pinned to this man's uniform, and he carries it back and delivers it to James. Isn't that special? The note was from an officer whose men were surrounded by Germans and like needed to get out. And since Rags got to the note before the German soldiers did, those men, they were able to be saved. I know. Sadly, there were many men who were wounded in battle and died because no one knew like where they were. No one could get to them, you know, so they would just sadly die alone in the field. Rags had this special talent for finding soldiers in trouble. And if he came across one that needed help, he would bring back a piece of their uniform or helmet so someone back at the base could help rescue them, or at least like retrieve their body. What a good boy, you know? Just what a real good boy. What a good boy. Just want to give him a treat. He's such a good boy. Just want to. Then in 1919, oh, it's so sad, James and Rags got caught up in like a mustard gas attack. Now, I guess at this time, it's not funny, but it's cute if you imagine it in your mind. Rags had a special little gas mask that James had made for him, but it flew off when Rags was running a message, and then he got hit and like just like blew off, I guess. When James came to, because he passed out or something, he was in a field hospital, and somehow magically Rags was there too. Rags had like crawled under his bed, and both of them were seriously injured, but they were there for each other. Rags's paws and ears had been injured, and his lungs were damaged from inhaling the mustard gas after his little mask had slipped off. James was in even worse shape and needed serious treatment. So they decided to send James back to the US to Fort Sheridan Medical Center in Chicago. But Rags wasn't allowed. Rags was not allowed to go with him because pets were believed to carry disease. So they were absolutely 100% not allowed to travel with soldiers back to the States. So like James and Rags had to say their goodbyes. I know. But there was another officer who knew Rags and like saw him sitting on the dock. Poor little Rags, just looking at his owner. And this officer decided to smuggle Rags onto the ship inside of his jacket so Rags and James could stay together. Now, this was a huge risk because if they found Rags on board, he would be chloroformed. I know. Wow. Chloroformed and just thrown overboard. Wild. I guess that was the military policy with animals coming back from foreign countries, but praise the Lord, Rags stayed hidden and he and James made it to Chicago safely. So at first, the hospital at Fort Sheridan, like, they didn't let Rags in to see James. They're like, who the fuck is this dog, you know? But as people started to hear the stories about James and Rags, an exception was made. Rags stayed at James's side the whole time. He was in intensive care at Fort Sheridan, which, if you've ever had a dog, must have been such a nice comfort. Sadly, James never recovered from the attack and died at the hospital in 1919. Rags survived. Woo! I mean, he had some damage to his ear and his eye, which left him blind and deaf, but he was here. By the time the war was over, Rags was a celebrity back at the Army base. His story was officially published, and he was awarded medals, ribbons, and he even got his own float in a parade. I know. So Rags ended up living with a military family named the Hardenbergs, and he would end up living with them until 1936, when he passed away at the age of 18. So he got 16 more years with another family. So it's cute, right? So, I mean, I roll because, like, look, Airbud was this like fake golden retriever who played high school basketball, right? And like, I believed it. I was all in with Airbud. And there are not one, not two, but there are 14 movies in the Airbud franchise. Yet you're telling me Rags the Terrier, a real life war hero who saved countless lives after being bombed, gassed, and partially blinded, has zero movies about him? Where is Saving Private Rags? Zero Bark 30. Those are my ideas. Thank you.